back with our weekly talk with XYZo, who is our director of mindfulness for the nonprofit. And we got a really cool topic for you today. It's kind of building on what we've been talking about. I mean, last week's was on life purpose, and I thought that was a very, very interesting video. And if you didn't see it, by all means, wherever you're watching this right now, just go ahead and search the history in that group or YouTube channel and you'll see it. But this week, we're going to talk about something a little different, interpersonal relationships and how that relates to plant-based living. So XYZo, how are these connected? Like, what can you tell us? How can you enlighten us today?
Yeah, no, I'm just sharing my little tidbits. But I think we'll start a little more specific and then expand it to a larger conversation. But essentially, relationships are at the center of life.
Yeah.
And the way that we're able to negotiate and work with our relationship with ourselves, with family, with friends, with strangers, with other cultures, other peoples, the world at large, will largely impact the quality that we experience in our life. The quality of fulfillment, of enjoyment, of peace, tranquility, happiness, whatever the case is. And so that is to say that the paradigm currently at this time is much more carnivorous than not.
True.
So, because animal products are heavily promoted, marketed, subsidized, etc., and insidiously find themselves in many products also beyond food, it can be difficult for one who has only known that life without knowing alternative ways of being, you know, to break out of that, to break out of that paradigm. So that's to say, although plant-based eating and lifestyle has increased in recent years, it's certainly still not the majority.
Right. For sure. I wish it was, but yeah, that's just where
Yeah.
we are right now.
One day, yeah. And that's to say, when anything is in the minority, it can be interpreted and perceived to be antagonistic and in direct opposition to the majority's paradigm. And when one really identifies with one's beliefs, cultures, traditions, etc., one is in a position to essentially feel threatened, by things that go against that. So that's to say, I might be, living my nice, peaceful, plant-based life. Let's say I have a plant-based T-shirt on. It says "Go vegan" or something like
Yeah.
that. I'm just walking around, and then one who heavily identifies, with I don't know, eating steak. Just a carnivorous way of being. Again, tradition, family upbringing, society, all that he's ever known. Casts and insults, projecting that perception of threat that he sees in me just because of the ideology, the lifestyle, which I choose to embrace and embody. So, in connection to interpersonal relationships, I can handle that kind of situation in a few different ways. Judgment, opposition, aggression from others. One of those, kind of like a default way of being would be to reflect that back, like starting an argument, getting hostile, whatever the case is.
Yeah, yeah. I know that on social media, an example of that, I think that sometimes if you convey that you are plant-based or vegan on social media, someone will comment with bacon, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Just one word. And then you can go several different directions after that
yeah.
happens.
Absolutely. That's a funny one because it's very, very common basic. But yeah, what I believe to be a more love-based, a more harmonious way to go about it is kind of reflecting on the notion that we're all reflections, for one another. That everybody is a composition, mosaic of many different characteristics, personality traits, beliefs, thoughts, feelings, etc. And so it is often the case that when we attack or judge something, that it is essentially a piece of ourselves which we fear or reject or repress.
Hmm.
So in knowing that, everyone is just reflecting back to you, then one can choose the higher road, let's say. And when I say projecting, reflecting back to you, like for example, let's say that I have like I'm in a little unbalanced place. I'm a little more aggressive, a little more impatient, at the time in my life. And let's say that I don't know, I'm at the store and the clerk, is I don't know, being rude or maybe says a snarky comment. And because I'm in that headspace, of being aggressive and whatnot,
Yeah.
that's essentially what I'm perceiving that clerk to be. But let's say I was living a little more compassionately with a little more empathy, trying to keep a bigger picture view in mind, trying to remember the fact that, I really don't know what anyone is going through, then perhaps I can interpret that same kind of impatience or like snarky comments by the clerk as, perhaps they're having a hard day. Perhaps something happened earlier that has them a little imbalanced, impatient, sarcastic, snarky, whatever the case is. So, yeah, in essence, everyone does what they do, but it's really the meaning, the interpretation, the story which we give those actions that really create our lives. Because the way I interpret something, the meaning I give it, is going to inspire thoughts and perspectives within me. Those thoughts and perspectives are going to generate emotions, and then those emotions are going to catalyze my actions. So, going back to this clerk example, let's say I perceive it to be aggressive. I'm having more thoughts of aggression. Anger is the emotion that is awakened from those thoughts of aggression. And then actions I'm taking, perhaps arguments, perhaps shouting, you know, different things like this. And obviously that leads to one kind of outcome, one kind of existence.
Right.
And in the same example, taking the opposite approach, the more compassionate, empathetic, then I'm inspiring thoughts again of compassion, of empathy, generating emotions of warmth, of kindness in me, or emotions. And then those emotions inspiring actions, perhaps as Hey, how's your day going? You know, you doing good? Or giving a compliment to try to, uplift them. And that leads to a very different kind of outcome, situation existence. So
I've got a question for you based on that example, just the general example. I know that in my own study of this, of what you're discussing right now, I've heard different things saying like, well, if I if I was in this situation and I was have the feeling to react negatively, it's someone's touching like a pain body. Yeah, I've heard that example before, right? An internal pain body of mine, which of course has nothing to do with the other person, but is projected on the other person, saying that they're doing something to you. And an example of that, I think, if I'm relaying this correctly to you, is like someone says, "Oh, you're pushing my buttons, like you're doing this," but there's also the other side, like I've learned, is that, well, that's some type of a pain body internally that someone is touching, some type of a wound. I don't know. Does
mhm.
that play into this, or is this something different altogether?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's all interconnected. And to make it more specific to the plant-based movement, because it is again, a kind of, well, actually, I don't know anymore, because I've been eating this lifestyle for a few years and it's certainly gotten more popular since. So I don't know if individuals experience, actually, that's a silly statement to make. But that's to say that often the case, when starting off with plant-based eating, there's a lot of backlash, from family, from friends, from coworkers, randos, whoever the case is. And, this can create a lot of hurt feelings, can create hostility, can create a sense of timidness, being closed off from further communicating and sharing, one's new lifestyle. And in not consciously trying to resolve and heal, those feelings that were generated from that backlash,
Hmm.
and then not trying to evolve one's understanding and view of these different interpersonal matters, then those hurts will remain in that pain body, and will further trigger me moving forward. Like to give you an example, um, I have a little rabbit companion. I don't like to say pet, but he's a funny one. He's great. And I remember many years ago, it was already known that I was eating plant-based vegan lifestyle. And there were certain family members who would joke around, like, oh, we're gonna cook up your rabbit. We're gonna fatten him up
Oh
and grill him.
no.
Yeah, just like rude, unnecessary. Um, and I remember one individual said that once, and it was in a larger, like, gathering kind of deal, like
Okay.
dinner, let's say. And I kind of just bit my tongue and just kept in that anger, that frustration, annoyance, as to just, like, not blow up and make a scene.
But yeah, that's, if you can, that's probably the preferred way, I suppose, right? Is it?
Yes, but the the way I handled my emotions, and then not further communicating that, perhaps after the situation, I don't know if it was conducive because of what came next. Because then maybe like a week later or so, a different family member also said some other rabbit joke, similarly, and then like I blew up on them, right
Yeah,
then and
it
there.
kind of was festering, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
unresolved.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's a direct example of what I'm talking about. Unless I'm doing that inner work, that kind of healing, trying to evolve my own thoughts and perceptions, forgive others, forgive myself, then that pain, that emotional energy will remain. which can then leak out and blow up in ways that are unintended and unconscious, out of our control. So this is I believe, a very important connection in regards to mindfulness and plant-based eating.
All right.
To really be aware of our relationship to the lifestyle, being aware of the impact that our relationships have on that lifestyle. Because another component of this is essentially shifting our actions and behaviors in ways that internally we don't fully resonate with because of another.
What do you mean? What does that mean exactly?
So, an example of this, let's say I'm new to plant based eating, I'm at the family barbecue. They're like, oh, hey, here's a burger. I'm like, no, I'm trying to eat plant based. Like, nah, come on, forget that. Like, no, really. And then, a second person, like, oh, stop it. You're being ridiculous. Just eat the burger. So in situations like that, essentially being pressured, feeling obligated, feeling manipulated, whatever the case is,
Hmm.
it's important to consciously cultivate a more resilient relationship, again, with our decisions, and not only plant-based living, but with all things, to really hone in on our whys, to really be aware of our principles and what we prioritize, as to not be so swayed off of our path, off of our, chosen bigger decisions with how to go about life. And also, again, too, like I've heard this example here and there now and again. Someone who's trying to eat plant-based, but their significant other, their romantic partner, is not.
Yeah.
And that significant other is, let's say, just like very pro animal product. And so their influence, their lack of support, their harassment, whatever you want to call it, can heavily influence the fledgling plant-based eater. And so it's in cases like that, it's very important too, to be empowered in our relationships, to have boundaries established and communicated, again, so that we're able to, you know, lead the lives which we believe to be moving in the direction of our greatest expression and embodiment. So yeah, that's a little bit. and
So that's to say setting the example. Is that what you're saying? Like lead by example?
If I were to say it on more casually, it would be like saying learning to be about it and to embody it, as to not shift from it. When the going gets tough, when pressures come up, when opposition is in the mix. Because, somewhere along the lines, in our current culture, society, it would seem that there is a lot of fear of confrontation and nonviolent contact or conflict.
Hmm.
Just like having a civil debate, let's say. From my own just perception of things, from what I've lived, it would seem that more people would rather bite their tongue to try to keep the peace, to try to not hurt other people's feelings, than to express, how they really feel and what they really think. And those are difficult matters.
You're
But
saying that that's how society has evolved. That's the present state of things. Well, it's common these days anyway, as opposed to in the past.
yes, I think so, particularly for the youth. I think it's certainly a generational kind of thing. But I don't know. It's a challenge to say, and I'm moving around because I have to turn my AC on. 'Cause I'm sweating. I've been just like reading all day, so I haven't really been moving. But now that I'm talking, igniting more energy, sweating nicely. So yeah,
Well, that's what's happening now in the northern hemisphere anyway. It's more sun, more hours of sun. The sun is higher in the sky, warming up. Just that time of year.
yeah, absolutely, I love it. So to get a little more practical, because I've spoken in a little more like abstract and bigger ways, or bigger picture ways, but some specific things that can be done. Let's see. I would say, in connection to the notion of handling judgments, opposition, backlash from others, first, a real understanding, a real solid understanding, as in within it is truly embodied and just understood at an empirical level. That is to say, before we connect back to the main topic,
Mhm.
you know, I think I've said this in another video. I understand that to run a marathon is 26.2 miles. If I were to run a marathon, I would understand that a marathon is 26.2 miles.
Yeah.
You know, I know you know.
Yeah, I've run them. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So that's to say, it's very important to understand the idea that all of us are always projecting our beliefs and thoughts onto others.
Wait, you're saying all the time? Like, because I know that for me, as I've aged or hopefully become wiser, hopefully, I tend to observe a lot more. And I do tend to see that when folks start accusing folks of something, they're usually talking about themselves. And is that what you're pointing out here?
Yeah. Yes. So indeed, the ideal is to be more in the objective observer stance, but due to human nature and our imperfectness, to some degree, we do pretty much always. Again, unless this is a very like consciously developed phenomenon to observe, to remain objective. So that's to say, really understanding that, people are always behaving in ways and communicating the perceptions with which they're really working. So
Mm.
it's like I can have compassion and sympathy, let's say, for somebody who is aggressive towards me, because I'm understanding that he is that way for a reason. That for whatever reason, whether it was, difficulties growing up, whether it was the environment in which he was in, whether it was a great hurt that led him to be less than loving. Those experiences and the thoughts, emotions, and actions which they've influenced are being projected in his life's expression, and that goes for anybody.
Yeah, I tend to try to view situations in that way and think that I just don't know what's going on in someone's life, right? I mean, as much as you think you do as an individual looking at someone else's life, I think we really don't know. And a lot of times you think, well, why is someone acting this way? What is causing this? Well, it's probably something that's happening or happened, like you said, that we're not aware of.
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side, still in connection to plant-based eating, that that can give a lot of compassion and sympathy when dealing with people who just might not be aggressive, but just who continue eating animal product, or just not being about it. Because I can think of many a great, lovely people that I know that I've come across in life, individuals who are deeply spiritual or into environmentalism or love all their animals,
Hmm.
but yet they're, consuming animal product, uh, whether or not they know, so much about the lifestyle, whether or not they've been, vegan before or plant-based before and have since left that path. And knowing that I don't know, you know, what they're going through, what their current perspectives are, what their challenges are, why they're behaving, why they're believing the things they do, I'm able to again take that back seat, which is a more of a place of peace. Because the opposite would be to be just in assumption city,
Uh,
and that's a place of great suffering
yeah.
because we can make up the wildest, most ridiculous stories. Having imaginary arguments in our mind for extended periods of time, just causing further agitation. And
True. Yeah, and I think you have to be secure in your core beliefs on this. I think because I know that there's always a dynamic of, let's say this is someone that you're in a relationship, a closer relationship, or someone that you see on a regular basis. Well, I think we know. Correct me if I'm wrong. That when you hang out with a certain people, they tend to influence you, and you become like them. So
yeah,
there's a balance there between handling this appropriately and then if they're pulling you in the wrong direction, then it's a challenge, I suppose. Everything's so many challenges in life. That's just another challenge.
yeah, certainly, certainly, and that's a very difficult, topic to discuss. Specifically, how to handle interpersonal challenges, and so at least for today's segment, I really wish to heavily emphasize, the perspectives that one can employ and embody, because from those places, just greater peace can be attained. It's like two scenarios. Let's say someone cuts me off.
When
Okay.
you're driving down the road,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay.
Scenario one, Assumption City. Like, oh, what a jerk. He has no respect. His parents raised them awfully. I can't
The
believe
horn
him. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, yeah. Honking,
out the
angry.
window, everything.
Yeah. Trying to catch up to him and like curse him out at the red light. All this dampens the mood for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I'm like hyped up, adrenaline rush and
The blood pressure is way up.
yeah, exactly. You know, and a lot of that came from, again, those assumptions, those beliefs. Like, yes, it was an action that was the initial cause, but the stories are what further aggravate it and exacerbate it and perpetuate it. In the same example, but a different approach, someone cuts me off, like, oh, all right, I'm safe. No one died. I'm still chilling, still cruising. Maybe, you know, I don't know, their drink spilled on their lap and it caused them to get a little crazy. Maybe they were dozing off because they just had to stay up all night for a loved one in the hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe they just found out some really bad news on someone called them and told them something terrible.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Absolutely. So, in again, in trying to remain as objective as possible, that's a place where peace can emerge from. This example I've shared before, but I'll share again in connection to this, and it's similar enough. But that's to say, like, let's say I stub my toe, like I hit it on a chair as I'm walking by. There's the physical pain. And then the emotional pain. If I were to say, like, oh, I can't believe it, my foot. How am I gonna dance around now? This chair is so stupid. I never wanted it. Why did I have to? Why they convinced me to buy it? I don't deserve to have my foot hurt.
Yeah.
All this extraness. Whereas if I just hit my foot, trying to stay objective, trying to stay equanimous and peaceful, like, oh, that hurt. Okay.
Well, there's so many examples, like you said. And actually, if anybody out there who's watching this, if you have an example you want to share with us, just type that in the comments. Let us know, because there are so many things that everybody's got their thing. I think, right, that if certain thing happens or a certain level of this happens, then you're going to be challenged. That's going to push you over the edge, or whatever you want to say. Everyone's got that point. So
yeah, certainly. So to shift to a little more specific practical tool, I kind of said this once, but like rushed it out at the end of a video, so I'll be able to explain it a little more now. Is this system, this technique of Ho'oponopono. So Ho'oponopono is an ancient Hawaiian affirmation system comprised of 4 statements, which is meant for self-forgiveness and reconciliation. And those 4 statements are: I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and thank you. And that's actually the meaning of these little tattoos. But that's another story.
yeah, we'd like to hear more about it.
Yeah, well, sure. But anyway, I'll get to it. I'll connect this now. It's not that impressive.
Another time, yeah, a better time.
So with those statements, great healing can occur. Because often, there is a deeper root to our mental, emotional agitations, imbalances, frustrations, etc. And that root cause can often be overcome with forgiveness. Like if there were a panacea to problems, my personal opinion is that forgiveness would be that panacea.
Yeah, I've heard that forgiveness helps the forgiver the most.
Uh,
right? Not the person supposedly, at least, in need of that forgiveness from someone.
yes, yes. And, furthermore on that point, when in a salty state, a state which is still holding a grudge, the individual, the grudge holder, the salt keeper,
Hmm.
is the one who will suffer. And so with forgiveness, that's the clear vehicle, the true path to evolve from those different emotional hurts, pains, traumas, to be able to overcome those challenges, transmuting them into opportunities and being able to grow to a far greater degree.
Yeah, another thing I've heard, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but
Mhm.
I think another way to explain that, or as an example, is that someone said not forgiving someone or a situation is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Certainly, certainly. And these matters are not easy by any means. I can talk about it, chit chat on it swiftly, quickly, with ease and grace, but to practice it is not the same.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the
you know,
challenge.
absolutely. Even me personally, I've certainly had salts um, many times in my life, and even stuff that I'm healing and working with currently right now,
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
in these regards. And so it's really a process. There's not really one event, one realization, one meditation, one reflection that's going to, just take away all pains and just, hey, it's all great. Again, it's
I
just
wish there was. It'll be wonderful.
well, in the process, this is where the growth happens. This is where the growth
It
happens.
is. Yeah.
So yeah, I would also add that employing patience, and compassion for oneself in that process is very important as well, because it can get a little I don't know if double-edged sword is the correct term. It's not, but just like a deeper degree of suffering in a kind of grudgeful situation. Let's say it's like this: I have a grudge against someone,
Mm.
and I know, intellectually, spiritually, that I should forgive them, but I still hold the grudge. I'm still salty. I'm still angry. And then the deeper degree of suffering can come in that I then judge myself for not yet having forgiven them, and for still being angry, just deepening the suffering, lowering my state to a greater degree. So this is where that self-compassion and patience come into the mix.
Okay, you said lowering my state. What does that mean? State of consciousness? What is
State of consciousness, state of being, state of emotion, state of mind.
right.
It would be as if, if there were a spectrum, let's say just like fear, despair, terror is at like the bottom, like
Mm,
peace, love, and bliss at the top.
right.
And essentially, it's the thoughts that I choose to entertain, the perspectives that I hold, that will heighten me or lower me on the spectrum, because that is the root, the base command for that. That's to say, for that movement.
Okay.
The thoughts, again, awakening emotion, the emotions generating, catalyzing actions. So if I'm having thoughts of, let's say, forgiveness, and I'm really putting a lot more emphasis on forgiveness, consciously so.
And this is the preferred way of handling it, right?
Yeah. Then that's going to inspire emotions in me, such as sympathy, empathy, compassion, just kindness, all those different ideas, concepts, feelings, energies. And then that's going to inspire actions. So perhaps reaching out to forgive more formally, perhaps practicing Ho'oponopono more regularly. Those four statements: I love you, I'm
Yes.
sorry, please forgive me, thank you. Perhaps that's going to inspire deeper journaling sessions to really work through, my emotions and thoughts. Maybe that's going to inspire more meditations surrounding those concepts of forgiveness, etc. And then those actions, which were ignited from emotions, which were inspired by my thoughts, will move me on that spectrum. On the flip side, let's say I continue entertaining this grudge, this anger, this frustration, that will inspire emotions in me, such as further anger, maybe depression, just unease, which will then physically result in perhaps I'm feeling a little depressed. So maybe like I'm eating a little more unhealthily. Perhaps I'm because I'm depressed, I'm unmotivated to get physical and active, and I'm just like slumped, most of the day.
Low energy. Yeah.
Yeah, low energy, so that's only going to take me lower on that spectrum. So yeah, there are practical things that can be done, but it really all starts within. That's really where the changes begin.
So are you suggesting that what we can do is work on our inner dialogue, I guess what we tell ourselves internally, so that when things externally approach us and come into conflict with that, which they will, it's given, right? That's part of life. That hopefully that inner dialogue, right, that positive inner dialogue will prevail when there's a conflict of those two things. Is that
Absolutely.
okay? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then important points to note on that, as to inspire more encouragement than opportunities for one to get discouraged. Because I've seen a little tendency just throughout different conversations I've had, where I can be speaking on notions like this, whether it's forgiveness or anything that's more empowering in nature. One might have a tendency to believe that, oh, oh, that's great, but I could never do it. It's like, oh, that's swell, but that's not me, or just like foolishness like this. Because ultimately, all those things can be changed. Like our thought patterns can transform consciously through
Right.
our own effort.
Question: when you say that's not me, does that typically imply that someone saying those words is just, I don't know, because someone could go through their lives just being affected all the time and reacting to everything that gets brought to that person, right? Instead of doing the inner dialogue. And they could say, well, me, I just go around getting affected by everything that gets thrown at me, and that's me. And that's right. If no one's ever understood this concept or worked on this concept, I can see why they'd say it's not me.
Yeah, yeah. That I'm a big proponent of introspection, of reflection, and those matters can be deepened and necessitates sufficient solitude, at different levels for everybody, but, moments of peace, again, of solitude, of being able to be with one's thoughts and emotions is necessary for evolution. I don't usually like to say things so matter of factly and definitively, but that's one thing that I'm willing to say, that any kind of shift which we would perceive as beneficial requires introspection,
Mm.
because from that introspection, new thoughts can emerge. And it's those new thoughts which will trickle out into the physical to create new situations. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's yeah, whenever you, and for a lot of folks, that may mean totally changing something up. If they never have solitude, that's a total change. A lot of times, that's what you get. Like if say like you go on a retreat, that's the benefit of the real benefit of the retreat is that you've totally changed something up, usually against your will because you have no other choice. But what you're discussing is a choice that we all have every minute of every day.
Mhm.
It's just that we have to choose that. We can go on a retreat. We can pull ourselves out of the rat race or whatever we want to call it
Yeah.
momentarily for a few minutes and then get back in. But
Mhm.
I get that.
And further on this idea, I know that a lot of people unfortunately fear, that solitude, fearing facing, their own thoughts, emotions, feelings, memories, etc. But again, in embracing what's within and reflecting upon it as using it as the resource from which to further grow, that's how we can continue to expand our peace, love, and bliss in this life's experience. But
Yeah, yeah, I could see how it may not be beneficial for some folks depending upon where their current state of mind is, because like you said, some folks might fear that, and then they might get into the solitary situation, and then they're just bombarded with these negative internal dialogues that
Mhm.
that's what they're afraid of because they know, okay, if I quiet it down, this negative things are just going to hit me nonstop.
Mhm.
And so that's a process for someone to work out of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you said it like that, so I can speak on that notion a little more. In that, it's very multifaceted, and there are a lot of influences, into that kind of state. So, for example, sleep, the quality of one's sleep, and having low sleep, irritability, and just agitation way up, imbalance in the brain. So one will be able to kind of slide to that low vibe side of the spectrum much more easily
Mm,
when one has a lack of sleep, sleep deficiency, when one is eating a little more unhealthily
mm,
with lots of refined sugars and processed foods,
right.
when one is not physically active because those essentially feel good chemicals have not been in the body's system.
Yeah, the body's designed to move. I know we've talked about that. So yeah, you need to, right? I have another question along with these things. What about, and I'm just throwing this out there, I don't know what you're going to say about this. I feel like the average person pumps himself up with caffeine in the morning and then hits themselves with alcohol before bed, right? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, for many, the life has unfolded in such a way influence after influence, decision after decision, in which having such stimulus from substance is necessary to keep that up, to keep up the pace, the intensity, the complexity.
Mm.
But again, it's tricky. And I don't want to diminish, judge, anybody's life, but more so share insights as to other ways of being, which could lead to, from my suspicions, a little more peace, a little more fulfillment, a lot of more fun.
So what you're suggesting could raise your conscious level, right? Your consciousness level above like where the average person is. Like I say, I have caffeine from time to time, alcohol as well. I try not to make it a daily habit because I feel like myself, like if I need that, then there's something else going on. But
Mhm.
but if it, I guess I'm questioning you like this because if it raises the consciousness level, and you're talking about consciousness level, by not indulging in that, maybe it's something to consider. That's
Well, specifically in terms of like stimulus substance, stuff like that, you know, are from the micro to the macro, from the big to the small, from the large themes to the details. The way we do one thing is how we do everything
mm,
on that spectrum. So that's to say that if I'm consuming substances with the impression and the belief, with the conviction that I need this in order to feel this, to do this, to be this, then I'm certainly saying the same thing with many other areas of life. So if I'm saying I need coffee, I need a lot of coffee every day in order to get through the day, well, then I'm also saying I need, and these are examples,
yes.
but then I'm possibly saying that I need, his, him, and hers external validation to feel good. I need this bigger house in order to feel like I've made it. I need you to do this so that I can be happy. In grasping and attaching to something external, that kind of external attachment, grasping action and behavior is just done across the board as well.
Oh,
The opposite side of that is to really tap into one's own internal resources, because ultimately it's like any spiritual path, any major religion, philosophy, etc. For the most part, everyone is saying that it all comes from within.
mm,
And many successful people, saying this as well, that it's really like it starts in the mind, it starts in the heart, whatever you want to call it. So in choosing that path, of internal cultivation, I'm essentially tapping into a resource that's limitless because I can always access it. It's always connected to me. It's not dependent on any circumstance, situation, whatever the case is. Like, let's say, for example, like with this whole pandemic, that we're currently still in, toilet paper just like, vanished.
it
And
has.
I've seen, I believe at the grocery shop that I go to, I think certain produce was no longer there.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it was because those countries that the produce was coming from, were just like locked down, closed off. They weren't really importing, exporting like that, at least in those weeks. So that's to say that just imagine. I have this thought experiment sometimes. It's just like I couldn't even imagine if, let's just say for a day, there was no coffee, no alcohol to be consumed.
Just one
Well,
day.
one day, what would happen to the society? How would people cope? And then that one day, what if that was 1 week, you know, or 1 month? Obviously, people can survive. But if one is not equipped with the perspective that our true resources, our true fulfilling, sustainable, expansive resources come from within, if I don't believe that, then I'm gonna have a hard time, without my coffee, without my liquor, and
Now,
everything
is that
else.
just here with what you're talking about today, or does that also connect to knowing your life purpose, like we talked about last time?
How so?
I
What
don't
do
know.
you mean?
I feel like maybe I've got this wrong, but I feel like if you know your life purpose, you're just going to be that much more motivated to get up every day and do everything.
Mhm.
Is that related, or is that just more of the
Yeah,
internal dialogue, the ongoing
I,
internal
I,
dialogue?
I I think it's related in that it is also aligned with this notion of internal activation. you know the life purpose, perhaps it can be seen as a kind of like let's say my life purpose is to support those in need. Let's just use a very vague example. Well, then that life purpose necessitates something external, like other people to support who
True.
are in need. But ultimately the drive to do so comes from within. That need to support is what's driving me forward, and then it's expressed in whatever way. And then similarly, it's my drive to sustain and empower, uplift myself no matter what's happening, that will lead to further growth in that direction. Because I mentioned the lack of coffee and the lack of liquor thing in terms of the paper towel too, and the produce,
Hmm.
because now everyone can see to a far greater degree that anything in the physical world, can disappear.
Yeah.
And most of it is taken for granted, thinking that everything will just remain as it is, that the peace will always be kept, that, the rug can never be swept from under our feet, we're good. It's like, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Looking back at history, so many examples of very affluent civilizations, coming to their end and, transitioning to a situation that was certainly not to the liking of everyone that was in that society or culture. So that's just to say, you know, internal empowerment, that kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
So it sounds like, to sum most of this up, my takeaway is you need this internal work, the things that you were discussing, the internal dialogue. It has to be right for your external personal relationships to be right. It would be,
Yeah, yeah,
I would
yes,
say it's the less correct your internal dialogue, the more challenging that those relationships are going to be. Any relationship.
absolutely, absolutely, positively. And actually, another very powerful philosophy, maybe even modality, it could be said, that I'll share before we transition is the Four Agreements.
Hmm.
Very popular book,
Yeah.
very powerful methodology. highly recommend that everybody listening read it if they haven't, and if they have, perhaps rereading,
Yep.
or at least like skim and reglancing, because based on what's actually happening in our lives at the current time, different things will always pop out and be more emphasized. So there's essentially always new takeaways in the same. And to share the four agreements, agreement number one, to I'm thinking of the fourth agreement. The first agreement is to be impeccable with one's word.
Hmm.
So this goes back to what I was mentioning before, to speaking one's truth, how one's actually feeling, what one's actually thinking, to say what one means and to mean what one says. And so that's to say that, when we beat around the bush, when we speak indirectly and make innuendos, allude to, that just leads to misunderstanding. And misunderstanding is practically at the root of most conflict, interpersonally speaking. So speaking impeccably, incredibly powerful, to speak true and direct. Obviously, you know, the situation and the context will call for its appropriate nuance. But for the most part, truly speaking authentically, and that comes with not lying, speaking honestly.
Hmm.
Agreement number one, brilliant. Agreement number two, to not take anything personally. Agreement number two and number three, I always flip flop them, but whatever the order is, not taking anything personally. So this connects to kind of what I was harping heavily on before, knowing that an inner standing, that everyone has a story going on in their mind for how life should be, and a story for every other thing, for every other little aspect of life.
Yeah.
So in having that awareness, when someone says something to me, attacks me, when I see something that triggers me,
You get
whatever
cut
the
off
case
when
is,
you're driving.
yeah, when I get cut off, I'm not taking it personally. I'm not embodying that projection, that pain, and I can just let it pass through, slip by, and I can remain in a more empowered, peaceful, balanced state. Number three or number two, again, I flip flop. The next one
Hmm.
is to make no assumptions. So this is probably my personal favorite,
Yeah.
because assumptions are just so dangerous.
You know what
Assumptions
happens? You know what happens when you assume? That's what it, right? You make an
absolutely,
ass out of you and me.
yeah.
That's what I'm
And
trying to-
I heard that expression many times, but I didn't understand it until a few years ago, actually. So this will be maybe for like one person watching, but it's worth it.
Oh yeah.
So to make an ass out of you and me when you assume, to write out the word assume, ASS, as you, you, and me, you know, to make an ass in you and me.
That's it.
So yeah, that's to say, when making assumptions, I don't know, just from my own personal experiences, I can think of so many times where I made an assumption. I created an elaborate, complex, multifaceted story, in my mind as to why someone did something, as to why something was happening, etc. Only very shortly after, to come across a new fact, or for someone to share new information, have a new perspective realization, And then the story comes crashing down and all of its material fall on my little ego, and then I'm a hurt boy. you know
I
and
think
again,
we're all guilty of that at some point. You know,
absolutely.
it's best to not ever do that. Like you said, don't assume, right? Because,
Yes.
uh, but yeah, we're all. It's happened to all of us, I think.
And so, like, an antidote to assumption is to remain in the unknown, and to question, a little more. So, like, let's say, I come across a friend, and I like, oh, hey, how's it going? They just give me a look, just like I did, just a mean look. And then I'm assuming, instantly start assuming, like, oh, wow, how rude, like, just a fool. Why are you doing that? You were never really my friend anyway, blah, blah, blah. All these assumptions. To stay in the unknown, to be more questioning, seeing that face and then being like, hey, um, how's it going? You all right? Everything good? Or how was your day? Or like, you have anything on your mind you want to share? Things like that. So
Yeah.
it, in questioning, one will be able to expand one's awareness and move closer to the truth, or to new information that can lead to a more informed place from which because essentially, like, the mind, when it comes to assumptions, the mind doesn't really care for the unknown by default.
Mm.
So assumptions is just filling in the blanks. If we haven't kind of worked on our mind over time, kind of cleaned house and cleansed out self-limiting, self-detrimental, judgmental perspectives, thought patterns, then those judgmental, hurt-based, fear-based thought patterns are going to be the substance from which we're making these assumptions,
Mm.
which just leads to further mental agitation.
Yeah, it's just a pattern, and it just builds. Yeah, I can understand that.
It's no fun.
Yeah.
It's no fun.
Yeah.
Questioning is more fun because I like to think of it as a discovery, an exploration and investigation. So yeah, the fourth and final. Actually, there is a fifth agreement.
There is. Oh, all right.
Yes. Separate book. I recommend this as well. I haven't personally read it yet, but I read a little bit of it and I was like, oh, okay, I like it. Fourth agreement: to always do one's best. And this is somewhat unrelated to the topics that we're mentioning, because it would seem that the first three agreements were kind of directly connected to different topics that we've discussed. But in relation to always doing one's best, it is essentially for a few different reasons. And some of those reasons are so that regret, and self judgment don't come into play.
Mm.
But it's also important to know that our best changes from day to day, from moment to moment. Because if I'm well nourished, well rested, in happy relation, I have a great balance in life going on, my best in every endeavor will be very different than when, I've been eating very little or very poorly, than when I've been stressed, not sleeping, etc. So, I cannot expect the same best, the same energy, effort, results that I've had at any other time, because I'm always in a new state, because there are so many factors that play into, our current state,
Right.
into defined state, like thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and all those factors are always at different levels. due to many other influences as well. So just knowing that no matter what's going on, no matter, what the situation, what my state is, I always strive, you know, to do my best, to be my best, because with this comes a lack of regret. With a lack of regret comes a lack of self-judgment. And in doing my best, I am moving more so in the direction to the most advantageous, fulfilling, beneficial situations that I would prefer. You know.
Yeah,
So
for these four agreements, I'm familiar with them. I have been for probably 10 years or more now. And I kind of wish that, folks would learn this stuff when they're very young. It's great. It would be a wonderful asset to have if you're very, very young and you've learned this and understood this. To me, it's kind of almost like learning how to manage finances. It's just things that, hopefully parents are teaching to kids, but schools generally don't teach them, but these are important skills, I think, for everyone.
absolutely, I would say the four agreements are, very like foundational in terms of mindset, in terms of just personal development, spiritual evolution, all these different notions. Because to dive deeper into the philosophy of the book, it's essentially stating that, you know, everything that is, everything that we do and express and embody is an agreement. Every belief and agreement, like I agree to believe this, I agree to subscribe to that. Um, and so those agreements and having those foundational, then basically just a lot of BS, can be bypassed when having those agreements, which are just of a more uplifting, empowered, you know,
Yeah.
of evolved kind of way. So yeah.
I agree. So what's the takeaway? What do you hope people get out of this talk? Been a pretty deep dive. I think a lot deeper than you or I expected.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway? What's the practice for somebody? Because you've described so many things here that I know we could all work on.
Mhm. Okay. I'll give three little takeaways, and then those three might have more components in them. So sorry. But one, to really become mindful, aware, reflective of one's internal dialogue, of the stories which one tells oneself,
Hmm.
because that will dictate and create the rest of your life. This can be changed over time, for it is a process, by correcting the erroneous, imbalanced, lower vibrational thoughts, instance by instance,
Hmm.
moment after moment, day after day, year after year. An example, if going back to the being cut off example, get cut off, I get angry, honking the horn, all this. Boom, I want to correct it, I want to shift. So then I immediately say, hey, no, I don't know what he's been through. Maybe it was an honest accident, whatever the case is, So truly being very diligent, very vigilant with this kind of approach to life. And that takes a certain level of, you know, maturity and willingness to dive within oneself. But the rewards are well worth it. Takeaway number two would be a conscious effort in the direction of forgiveness of whatever the case is. This can be done, some practical actions, modalities, journaling, because often the case, we have so many thoughts that are just all interwoven, just like a big knot of hair, a big, you know, ball of spaghetti. Let's,
Yeah.
yeah, and in journaling, maybe just like stream of consciousness. It doesn't need to look pretty, doesn't need to be elaborate, grammatically correct, whatever the case is. We can start to unthread and then see the picture more clearly, and that will lead to greater internal, clarity and harmony, from which further healing can take place.
Yes.
Um, Another little practical of forgiveness: meditations, guided meditations. There are countless brilliant meditations in this regard, and I would highly recommend.
Yeah. And we did a video. We did a video on that. If people want to search back and wherever you're watching this, you can probably find that video.
Yeah. So I love the app on Android and Apple iOS called Insight Timer. Insight Timer. And it is a meditation app which features over 24,000 free guided meditations. And they certainly have a meditation for everybody. Great application, awesome team, mission, and vision behind it all. So, again, highly recommend that. And if you do, we can become friends and we can find each other. Another practical modality is physical fitness. So it might seem slightly unrelated, but again, in being physically active, one's mood improves due to the neurochemical changes that take place in the body. And when one stays consistently physically active, then these beneficial changes become the new homeostasis. And just like your baseline mood lifts and increases.
And this is because I know we've talked about this in a previous video, because the body is designed to move.
Yeah.
Right. So it's gonna start to degrade away from optimal condition if you're not moving regularly.
Absolutely. And also in physical fitness, in being able to witness one's growth, in being able to remain disciplined in one's practice, this leads to tremendous mental growth, evolutions and shifts. And basically, if I'm very hurt, if I'm very non-forgiving, then it could be more likely than not that mentally I probably could be a lot stronger. Mentally, I might be a little delicate. Physical fitness, staying consistent, strengthens, empowers my mind. As I grow stronger in body and mind, then such feelings of resentment, of being begrudged, etc., can begin to crumble away.
That's interesting.
To a greater
Okay.
degree.
I don't know if I've ever, I guess I've kind of knew parts of that.
Mhm.
Tell me if this is right, because I feel like, in running, like I've run marathons, I've run ultra marathons. I think that when after a certain time of exercising, and this probably is different for every person out there, depending upon your physical fitness level, if you've been moving or not, you get to a point where you just want to quit. Everything inside of you mentally is saying, just stop right now. Don't go any further, you know? And then for a long time after that, if you have a long way to go, if you're running somewhere, walking somewhere, whatever you're doing, you have to endure that mental state and you have to push beyond that. And so much of it is mental. And I recognize that from these long distance running, it's like it gets to a certain point, it's all mental.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really the fruit, I would say, like the true fruit of physical activity, physical fitness is the internal shifts that come with it. You know, the like physical changes, that's a very nice bonus. But the real juice of it, again, from the internal shifts. So those are the three in terms of forgiveness. And then the third thing, which is a new thing that I haven't discussed, but I'll give a brief overview, I suppose. And the encouragement for this is inner child work.
Hmm.
So, you know, a lot of our behaviors, beliefs, feelings, perceptions, judgments, etc., stem from our early years of development, from childhood. So, in being able to do that inner child work through the forms of meditation, specifically for that, different journaling prompts, specifically for that, different activities, specifically for that, working with different professionals, specifically for that, then I'm able to overcome those very foundational internal obstacles, and limitations that I have. And in doing that, a whole bunch of energy awakens and opens, returns back to our body, mind, emotion, spirit, into our life.
And this is something you need someone else to work on with, you're
Not
saying?
necessarily, not necessarily, but
Right.
there are. I mean, whether it's a like a holistic lifestyle coach or a life coach or a therapist or I don't know some other professional. I know that there are multiple modalities through which inner child work can be done, and I'm not tech savvy enough to think of an appropriate example, but
My guess is we could have an entire video on this.
yeah, yeah,
On
yeah.
inner child work.
The inner child stuff, maybe that would be next week. But yeah, possibly maybe just like YouTube and Googling or Ikoja-ing, making that term popular.
Yes.
If that sounds curious, because again, tremendously powerful, tremendously powerful. Whether it is healing from childhood traumas to clear that energy, again, to awaken the energy that was lost and repressed from those traumas, or whether it's reclaiming our sense of joy, uh, ease of expression, kindness, compassion from childhood, that can also be reclaimed, reintegrated. There's a whole lot, with inner child work. So
Mm.
that is something I deeply encourage and recommend to, because our relationships that were modeled to us as children are essentially like the defaults, the root program in our subconscious minds for how we'll interact with every other relationship in our life as well.
Mm.
If we
And you're saying that not in a spirit of, okay, just blame it all on your parents, right? Or whoever
no,
raised you, right?
yeah, no, 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 no,
Right.
no. I mean, it can definitely be interpreted that way when it comes to talking about inner child stuff. but basically, what we grew up around, whether it was our parents or whether it was our guardians, whoever raised us, or teachers or coaches, or, whoever was around more frequently and consistently, those, the ways in which they engaged in their relationships, those behaviors that they exhibited, we've taken pieces of those behaviors, and those are at the deepest level of influence for our current behaviors in relationships.
Right.
So one can come to, one's own internal clarity and, personal growth that comes through it all through doing inner child work for oneself. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. 3 takeaways summarized once again, real quick. Checking one's internal dialogue,
That's number one. Yep.
focusing on forgiveness,
Two.
my personal picks for how to go about forgiveness, journaling, meditation, physical activity. And then the final, looking into inner child work and perhaps diving into some of those modalities and practices. Very fruitful, very, very fruitful, impactful, powerful stuff. And all of that connects to interpersonal relationships, in that all of those are at the real root of how we interact with others, for how we manage our relationships, for how we form and cultivate, sustain, and transition out of relationships. Yeah, there's a lot there, but hopefully everyone watching took a little something away from it. And if you are watching it, wherever you're watching it, if something did resonate, perhaps sharing a little comment,
Yeah. Or those
or
3
question,
takeaways.
collaboration. Yeah,
Yeah. The 1, 2, and 3, right? Just comment 1, 2, or 3. Let us know which one you're going to be working on. I mean, we could work on all 3, but there's probably one that pops into your mind that, wow, I really am behind on that one. And, that's probably of highest importance.
yeah, yeah, and that would be fun if you're still watching this deeply. Respect. I appreciate you,
Yeah.
and in giving feedback and gifting feedback, that will only further expand, what we're able to share, and it can be much more personalized. We can have a much more fun time. It'll be to everyone's benefit. So
Yeah, and also any of the comments that you might want to make, mention some specific things, because each of these concepts, the 3 takeaways, for instance, has so many specific things that we could go into. Like we'll do more videos. Maybe we'll do more videos based on your feedback and your comments.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm half sleepy. I skipped my midday nap today, so I'm kind of drifting. Eye
All right.
scratching.
Well, you still transmitted a tremendous amount of wisdom to us in the time of this video. So I'll tell you from my point of view, thank you for this. There are some things that I learned here for sure. Other things that I'm reminded of, and I think it's the internal mind work is a constant thing, right? It's just like anything else, like a garden. You have to tend to it. So
Mhm.
um, you know, thank you for, I guess, being able to effectively transmit to us the importance of this in everyone's lives.
Absolutely. And I want to make an important point based on what you said. It's certainly a process and even a lifestyle, to choose to personally develop oneself, to choose to be introspective, to choose to heal and overcome one's internal challenges. You know, it's a process, and it can be viewed as a fun game, you know, just like leveling up,
Fun,
new
yes,
challenges, new rewards. That's how I see it, and that's why I'm so into it, because it's just
right.
all the new, all the growth that comes from it. It is very fun and fruitful, very different than just the plain life. As was once famously said, the life wow, I forget the famous quote. I'm gonna paraphrase it. But
Okay.
the life unexamined is not the life worth living.
Yes. Yeah. I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. It's a great
Mm,
final little thing for us. So can't wait to talk again, probably in about a week's time. So
yeah,
look forward to reading the comments and look forward to talking to you, XYZo, again at something that's very relevant to all of us, and really will provide great benefits to anybody watching. So thanks for your insight on all this.
absolutely. My pleasure.
All right.
All right.
Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. See you again.